Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining our monthly webinar series. As Philip mentioned, I'm Cliff Babbitt, the Director of Solutions Architecture here at Formfast. Appreciate everyone's time today. What we're planning on doing today is talking a little bit about FastFlow, our workflow automation tool. It's a browser-based application that we use to automate workflows in healthcare IT, typically internal processes like HR documentation that might be going through inter-office mail, or documents that might be filled out in a spreadsheet or paper form and either sent inter-office mail or emailed. We can take those forms, put them online, and route them through processes to automate the response, improve turnaround time with processes, and also generate data for reporting and dashboards. So as you can see, we do have a login process that can be tied to an Active Directory or a user database in the hospital. We can have users log in manually or can pass that through Windows. So users can just click on a link on a website or have an icon on their desktop to access this. Typically, our customers will deploy FastFlow in their intranet and have either a link to categories of forms or just into FastFlow, so you can select forms as you get into the application. Today I'll be talking about human resources automation. It's just one of the areas where our customers have automated processes inside their organizations. We've seen a number of different types of processes in the human resources environment, from performance evaluations, personnel action forms, or employee status change forms, from generic processes like that down to very specific processes for employee terminations or new hire processes. The key here is that we can take a form that already exists in paper or Excel or Word format and convert it quickly into an online fillable form. So we have a means of putting these all online and building processes around them. We can also categorize those so that users can view just the forms that are necessary for their job function, or can easily get access to the forms they need when they need it. And in this example here, we've got a number of different HR categories, from accommodations and leave of absence forms to performance management, payroll. All of these forms may have individual processes, or there may be a process that you assign to multiple forms. But this now can take a form that was typically captured in paper or just a fillable form and route it electronically through a predefined process. So we can meet all the policies and procedures associated with the desired process in the organization, so that the appropriate people can see that form when they need to. So if there's an accommodations or leave of absence form that needs to be sent through some approvals and then to HR, we can build that into the process so the end user doesn't need to know where that form has to go at the next step. They just submit the form and it will go through the process. So here I might select a form. In this example, I'm going to show a performance evaluation. And one of the great things about an online process like FastFlow is that we can not only capture data elements in the form, but we can pre-fill that from external sources. So we may go out and search for an employee ID or an employee name to fill this form in. So as a manager, I might be putting in a performance evaluation for one of my employees. rather than typing that all in from scratch and having to remember all the details about my employee, I can go out to a database, bring them back into this form. So I may query by their ID or employee name, and then that will pre-fill some of the information on the form. So I only type in the employee's last name, and it can bring in that Terry Collins, her employee ID is already embedded on the form, her position, department, my information as a reviewer might be filled in the form automatically. So we're streamlining the process of completing the forms as well as automating the process of the form takes once it's completed. Also on the form, I have the ability to do drop-down lists, checkboxes, free text fields, a number of different entry methods to make the form a little bit more user-friendly, and also potentially take up less space. So there might be forms where you have, on a paper version, might have dozens of checkboxes or items to select that we can condense down into one drop-down list. Again, we can tie that into elements that are predefined by the organization. We can either allow users to go beyond those predefined drop-down elements, or we can restrict them so they can only fill in the information that's possible in a process. So in this example, on a performance review, I've got score drop-downs on the form that allow me to only select the scores that are available. And so in this example, we've got 1 through 5. I can't go outside of that range, and it's automatically calculating a total for each one of the sections on the form. So as I fill out an area, say here, of personal behavior modeling, that's calculating the score for each one of those areas and putting that score where it's appropriate on the form. So I don't need to manually do any of these calculations. One of the other great things about this in the process is we can actually drive the workflows from some of these values. In this example, we might say that if an employee gets over a certain threshold for their total score, if the total score is out of 500 and maybe they get over 450, they might be put into a queue for Employee of the Month or Employee of the Year. So these processes can be built to really improve how we're treating the documentation and adhering to policies that may be difficult to adhere to in a paper process. So here I put in some drop-down elements on the form. It's calculating this. I type in my notes, and I submit that to go on to the next step in the process. And again, as I'm submitting it, as an end user, I don't necessarily need to know where it goes next in the process. FastFlow is going to take care of all of that for me. As I click submit, it will route it to the next appropriate person. And in this process, it might be looking at the employee and sending it directly to her. In another example, I may want to manually send that to somebody within a department. So if there's HR review is required, but I don't know exactly, or the process doesn't know whom to send that to next, I could be prompted to send that to a specific user. So the route gives me some different options that I'll talk about again in a moment. Also, as a user, once I send the item, it's going to track that for me automatically, so I know the present location, where that is, how long it's been there, and some key details that I may not be able to get to in a paper environment. So I can see this employee evaluation was sent yesterday at 11:19 p.m. I can see that it's been sitting in Terry's queue as the ICU nurse since then. What's great about this is two different things. Behind the scenes, what's going on is that an email has been sent to that user if they've got email notifications turned on to let them know that the form is waiting for them. It doesn't actually send the form through email, but it lets them know that a form is out there, so it's secure. There's a link to it that would prompt them to either log in or pass their Windows credentials through. So there's not secure or employee information being passed through the network. It's just a URL that lets them get into this form and complete it. But it's also tracking that time frame. We're auditing where it is and how long it's been there, and behind the scenes quietly keeping track of that time frame. And we can also set thresholds for automatic notifications. So if it's been in Terry's queue for more than 3 days, she may get a reminder that it's sitting out there. So all of this is a way of automating the process so the end user doesn't need to know, but I can also have visibility into the process without having to call or email somebody just to know where it is. So here in my outbox, at any given point in time, I can see. The recipient will log in, again, through that hyperlink or by clicking on either a link in your intranet or an icon on their desktop to get into FastFlow, and they can see in their inbox the performance review that's waiting and have some ability to interact with that form. They can click on the form and add comments to that. We may designate on the form, just like you do in a paper Excel version, where the manager is putting in information, where the employee is filling in their portion. But they can fill that out, and they can also approve or digitally sign that if it's part of the process, add attachments to that, and see on the right-hand side of this window a checklist of the things that they might need to do with this form. So if there are documents that they need to attach to this process, they can quickly and easily do that here and see what's required. As a workflow administrator, most of our customers will deploy a handful of forms that Formfast will configure when the system is implemented, and Formfast will perform some professional services to configure the workflow, but we also hand over the tools to most of our users in an enterprise environment to continue configuring these workflows without any need for programming experience. So we've got a workflow designer that's visual. The users or administrators can see the process and make sure it adheres to some policies. And there are some options on the process that I want to just bring attention to here. So as with any process, we'll have an initiator, and then in this particular example, we're having the form decide where it needs to go next. So as in a performance evaluation, the manager fills out or selects an employee, and then based on that employee's name, we're going to route it to him or her for completion or adding their self-evaluation, and then it will go back to the initiator, who is the manager, and then it will go on to someone in human resources to review that before it's sent to a final disposition, which I'll talk about in a second. But we can pass that on to a specific user in a process based on data that's filled in on the form, and we can have contingent steps along the way. You may not be able to see this on over the WebEx very well, but we also have the ability to digitally sign in different steps of the process, again, tying into the user's credentials, so we know that the manager has approved this form, she signed off on it, and moves on to the next step in the process. We have some ability to either route to individuals or groups. In groups, we can have it sent to 2 or 3 folks simultaneously who may just all be interacting with it in the same fashion. So if it goes into an HR queue and there are 2 folks who handle performance evaluations or look at those, it might go into both of their queues simultaneously. It's really one queue that they're both seeing, and then the first person to process that removes it from the queue that both of them are seeing. In other circumstances, we may want to have multiple people in a group interact with that. So if there is a process that needs to go through HR approval and you need a threshold of, there's 5 stakeholders in HR who sort of own a process, you may have a threshold of 50% or 70% of those individuals before it moves on to the next step in the process. So we have a lot of flexibility to build out a process to adhere to requirements in particular workflows. Once a document is complete in a process, we have a number of different dispositions or final resting places for those forms. That may be in an existing HRIS or content management system that our hospitals or our customers have in place already. It may be just a file structure where you want us to put it out onto a network share where those employee status change documents are maintained. But it could also be our content management systems. We have the ability to archive that content either to an external database or in our content management at the end of the process. If we're archiving it in our content management, we have the ability to take any one of the fields on the form and make that an index value. So if we've got employee name, ID, social, hire date, all of these fields could be values that I can search on later. So content retrieval now allows me to go back and search through any of the workflows that I might have authority to access and that we've already passed through a FastFlow process. Once I retrieve those documents, it brings back, I'm just returning an employee search here for a particular set of folders under an employee, and I can see a folder structure that's customized for the organization. So we might have folders for a patient and subfolders for tax payroll forms, for employee health forms, licensing. All of those subfolders can have individual content underneath them that are indexed appropriately. And then as I click on any of the content here in the FastFlow Content Manager, I can bring up the items and see employee health services documentation or nursing licensing that I may want to retrieve for this particular employee. So all of this could be in the Formfast content management system or in a separate system already maintained at the hospital. So with that, I'll take a little bit of time to open it up for questions in the process for any of those of you who might have particular processes or questions that you have about how FastFlow could work for your environment.
Okay, thanks, Cliff. We actually had a few questions come in. We'll start with those first. But if you haven't done so, go ahead and enter your questions to the chat in the chat panel and send them to me, myself, and I'll go ahead and get them answered during the session. The first question, Cliff, was, can you add attachments to the workflow?
Yes, you can. I briefly mentioned it, but there are a few different ways that you can do attachments. You can either allow anyone in a process to add an attachment anywhere along the line, but you can also prompt users for specific attachments and even have them required at certain steps. So if we have an employee status change and there's a corresponding spreadsheet that needs to go along with that, we can prompt the user when they submit that form to attach the spreadsheet, and that document or attachment will reside with that process as it goes along. And any user that has an application to open that will be able to see that that attachment in the process. Good question. Thank you.
Okay. And another question came in. What's the most common HR workflow that you can implement?
That, I would say probably our most common workflow is an employee status change or something like a personnel action form. Sometimes our customers will deploy that as a single workflow, but often they'll split that out into status change for specific types of statuses, like an employee's transferring from one department to another. And this gives the organization the ability now to build out and customize what that process is. Often, in my experience, our customers have deployed workflows on a single form just because it's cost effective. They have an NCR triplicate form that they wanted to capture everything on it, and they then kind of make that adhere to a process. This gives you a little bit of flexibility to take that outside. So I would say personnel action forms or employee status changes are the most common.
Okay. Another question. What happens when someone forgets to sign a form?
Very good. Yeah, very good question. What typically happens in that process, as I mentioned before, we're keeping an audit trail and tracking what's happening to that workflow, and there's a time frame that can be set for an automatic trigger to notify users when that's stalled. So if a user does forget to sign that, if they click on it, they can save their changes and come back to it later, but they'll be reminded at that threshold set in the system when they've forgotten it for 2-3 days, whatever that threshold is.
Okay. And what reporting capabilities come with the system?
Good question. I actually didn't talk too much about reporting here, but we have a number of standard reports that are built in about form usage and track the data on the form. But as a default, we're capturing every single data element on the form can be tracked and extracted to a database. We can build custom reports as part of a process, so if there are specific things that our customers would like to see, either displayed in a report that's displayed visually in the application or is triggered to email that or generated on a schedule, we can do that. But we can also tie into external reporting applications. So if you do have, or if our customers have Crystal Reports or Microsoft reporting services and want to use that with our application, we're storing this all in a SQL database, and it's a very open structure that can be used with third-party reporting tools easily as well.
Okay. And another question, can I start workflows from an item stored in the Formfast Content Manager?
Could you repeat that?
Can I start workflows from an item stored in the Formfast Content Manager?
Oh, that's a great question as well. Yes, you can actually associate processes that can be launched from existing content that's stored in CM, our Content Manager. So an example of this might be a license or some sort of credentialing that if I am going in and reviewing that content, I can simply click on the content in CM and select a workflow process that I want to initiate from that. And that will automatically attach the content that I'm reviewing in that process and either pre-fill a form or just send that content through the appropriate approval process. So in that example, you might have it go through a nursing supervisor review and then back to somebody in HR, and again, it could prompt them for attachment of a specific file and say, well, this content is out of date. We need a new license on file for this nurse. Could you attach that? And that process then will gather that content, bring it back, and store it back in the content management system as well.
Okay, sounds good. And I got one last question, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up. This question begins: if I created an employee review form, how would I set up a workflow that would require the employee that would not necessarily be a normal user of your platform to be able to sign the form?
That's a good question, and this kind of goes on the edges of what we normally do with FastFlow. Digital signatures are a common part of the process, but if a user or if an employee needs to sign it, we've seen this with maybe with employees that don't have computers, maybe cleaning services or nutrition services. They may not necessarily be assigned, or have computer access readily. So for those users or new employees, you might still require a manual signature process on some forms. And some of our customers will still require a manual signature on certain forms like termination notices or action forms that are disciplinary forms. But those could also be tied into our eSig platform as well for those customers who are using eSig or have that. You could also use an external device like a Topaz Sig Lite or even sign on an iPad for some of that content. But that is an area where some of our customers still rely on a paper or a wet signature process for some of those forms or employees.
Okay. All right. So that's all the time we have for questions right now. At the end of the webinar, there's going to be a box for questions and suggestions that'll come up at the end if you didn't get a chance to ask your question. And I'll go ahead and have Cliff reach out to any other questions that were received after this. But before we wrap up, I want to briefly go over the upcoming webinars that we have. December 16th, we're going to be showing you how to automate your IT access requests. And then on January 13th, we'll also be automating clinical document solutions. And be sure to look out for the upcoming webinars after that, because we're going to be doing these monthly. So you'll be able to get some more information if you're an IT professional, an analyst, a director, process improvement leader, operational leader. These webinars are for you guys. At the end of the session, there's going to be a registration link that you can register for all the other sessions. And then there'll also be an opportunity for you to request a demo, a more personalized demo, and view some of our recent webinars and then some more case studies. So again, I want to thank everyone for attending today, and I'll see you all next